Well, today, we're actually just going to have a serious conversation, believe it or not, on this episode of the Knowing God podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Knowing God. My name is John Frawley.
And I'm Caleb Rowland.
And as you saw Caleb, he introduced our topic today. We're usually try to start out with a little bit of humor, but we're actually going to be starting out pretty seriously today. This is a really, really important topic, and it follows a conversation that we had on Sunday. It's really a sermon, I guess, a message more than a conversation, but we hope it spawns into a conversation on the subject of mental health and just kind of what we feel right now in terms of just where we are right now as a society, and also as we relate this to our churches. And so I thought we'd start it this way. You know, we've all been very familiar with the word pandemic in the last few years. But, you know, we have associated pandemic with, you know, COVID-19 and all the different things associated with that. But there are other pandemics, I guess, that we see that are ongoing in our culture, and one of those is mental health.
Absolutely, and it's almost becoming endemic, right? That now it's like it's moved from being this thing that's been talked about to now it's just kind of this thing that everybody seems to be living with in their kind of day-to-day life. So it's a pretty interesting and I think really detrimental and needed thing that we talk about, especially within the church, because historically the church has not done a great job of addressing mental health. So
yeah, it seems like this is a subject that a lot of people carry a lot of shame with, you know, unnecessarily so. And that's part of what our heart is in kind of having this conversation, that we want to kind of normalize some of these discussions. And so we've done different things here at Metropolitan. We do these things called cultural conversations. We had one a few months ago now. I think, when was that? That was early in the spring, I think. And we talked a little bit about just depression and anxiety and some of the things that we're seeing, you know, post-COVID, but also some of the things that we're seeing, you know, even before COVID. Right. And, you know, mental health was something that a lot of people talked about, but now it seems like we're impressed that we need to talk more about this.
Absolutely. And I think we're all realizing in this season especially that none of us are actually as put together as we thought we were.
Yeah.
Right? And I think all of us really do our best to put our lives together, right? We're trying to hold it all together. And I think COVID and the isolation combined with just all of the different political turmoil that was going on and all the different, you know, polarization that was coming, especially into churches, that it just kind of became this thing of you can't hold it all together anymore, right? And I think we all started to realize that we're more fragile than we really think we are.
So we're going to cover a few different topics here, and we pray that this would be helpful, maybe spark some more conversations, spark maybe some next steps that need to happen in your life if you're struggling. But kind of let's start there and just talk about just how frail and fragile we are. So the sermon text that we use on Sunday was one that's well known. It's 2 Corinthians 4:7. And Paul says this, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. And so I love that image, jar of clay. And so, you know, I kind of compared that to an iron skillet, but there can be a lot of different things that we compare ourselves to where we think we kind of are more of this cast iron skillet approach that's indestructible. You have one of those in your house?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I love cast iron skillets. So it's great. If you put soap in my cast iron skillet, we're going to have words. So I'm going to tell you that right now.
That would make it destructible.
Yes, absolutely. So,
yeah, but they're indestructible and they don't chip easily. You can use them in a variety of contexts. You can heat them up to, I don't know. I mean, when we season, it's like they always say, put it in your oven as hot as it can go, 500 degrees. And then you get that seasoning on it, and so they're indestructible. And we oftentimes associate ourselves or try to project ourselves in this way that we have this tough veneer that we can overcome everything in this world. But Paul says here, no, we are actually these fragile pots. So what are some ways that we're fragile? What did come to mind for you, Caleb?
I think one of the ways that we're fragile is that whenever we are isolated, even if you're an introvert, I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert. And I think during the pandemic, whenever we were isolated, I was like, oh, this isn't so bad at first, right? But then you get month after month after month after month, and you start to realize maybe I do need people. Maybe I actually need people more than I like to think. Maybe maybe I need people more than I realize most of the time. And so I think that our need for community and for people to support us, we always need that more than we realize.
That's good. Yeah. I always say that we're not like Tupperware containers, where we have our physical side over here, our biological metrics over here, and then we've got our spiritual side over here and our emotional side. And, we really do kind of bleed into one another. And like those categories just aren't really mutually exclusive from one another. So you might feel off physically or socially, and it impacts every part of your life.
Correct.
And that's really what we've seen in the last few years. Have people have kind of withdrawn, and like you said, there's been a lot of anxiety and just stress that's been in our society, and it's caused people to feel some level of crisis in their lives.
Definitely. I think that along with that fragility just comes the fact that whenever we realize that we're fragile, then we also realize the impact that these external circumstances can have on our lives, right? And with the pandemic and with again the all the unrest that came with that, because it wasn't just COVID-19, it was all of the politics that came around that, right? And then there was an election right in the middle of that, and then there were protests and riots in the middle of that. And as a nation, I think watching all of these things from an isolated position in your home through a TV, and you're saying, what does this mean? How do we reconcile all of these things together? And then whenever you gather together as a church, how do you reconcile all of that together whenever it seems like everything is so different, and yet we're coming together still as a church for the same purpose, under the same authority? And how do we come through that together as a congregation?
Yeah, thinking about the external challenges that we face, you mentioned the political, just rhetoric that was so amped up in this last election cycle in 2020, and we're coming up on the midterms here, and I'm sure that's same thing that's gonna happen. But it was very, very polarizing in our culture, and then you also have on top of that all of this economic stress and anxiety, that we've seen. Inflation is a word that everybody is familiar with right now. And I think I saw like the S&P index is like down 17% since January 1 from today.
Right.
And, that's like the highest dip, even more so than like what we saw in World War II.
Right. I mean, even just on the day-to-day, we could talk about gas prices. We could talk about a million different things that are just, again, if you're talking about being a clay pot, it's just somebody holding it, right? And every little thing is just a little more pressure, and a little more pressure, and a little more pressure. And you wonder when's the next thing that's just gonna cause that thing to shatter? When's the next thing that's gonna cause that thing to explode? And I think that a lot of us feel that, that there's this pressure that's building on us. And, if you watched Encanto, then you probably know, pressure and it drip, 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 and it never stop. Like, it's just like this constant building, and you wonder how much you can sustain with that.
Yeah, so. It's such great questions, and it's such needed questions to ask. And everybody's threshold's a little bit different. But if you're convinced that you are Superman, that you don't need one another, that you don't need, just health, or whatever, we tend to take a dip, in our mental health.
We do, and I think the issue is that when the problems are external, we can kind of take it a little bit, right? But the problem is all of us as human beings, we internalize those things eventually.
That's right.
The external issues eventually become internal issues. The stress in the world, the turmoil in the world eventually becomes stress and anxiety inside of us many times, if we're not careful to guard against that. And I think that that's definitely happened during the pandemic, is the fact that those things that were external, we've now internalized them. And that's why across the board you see that there's such mental health issues. I know that my wife, is a mental health professional, and one of the statistics that she told me is just mind-boggling and frightening, really, is that since the pandemic began, the number of adolescent females who have committed or attempted suicide has increased by 50%. And that's a terrifying number. I mean, that shows how much internalization is going on with all of these pressures, with all of the different issues that are going on in the world, and how much that's actually becoming internalized, and we're taking that on, and that's causing real issues, both mentally and physically, relationally, everything that we can think through. So
yeah, and you really see it with our youth, like you said, and maybe as you get older, we like to think that maybe we grow with some degree of coping mechanisms. We have healthy things that we do, healthy outlets for those that are in adolescence, early adolescence, they haven't developed some of those same skills.
Right.
And so the last 2 years that have increased so much social trauma and brought so much anxiety, we have felt that with our youth, and it is scary.
Absolutely. And so as we come together now, maybe we approach it from a church angle, right? Because I mean, as much as we kind of look at statistics and everything else, we're not mental health professionals, but we do work professionally in churches, right? That's a way that we work as our jobs, as more than that, as our calling within the local body of the church. And we see specific and unique things whenever we bring a diverse body of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different family backgrounds, different political backgrounds, right? And we bring them all together under one purpose. That's causes a specific set of issues, doesn't it, for pastors specifically?
Sure does, yeah. You think about, again, we're talking about the last 2 years specifically, but just church in general, as we've made the point many times on this podcast, is that church is diverse, and we should strive for unity despite that diversity. In fact, that diversity is a beautiful part of the church.
Yes.
The fact that the gospel can unite us regardless of our socioeconomic status, regardless of our backgrounds. And so if you amplify all of the polarity that we see in our culture, that we've seen politically, racially, economically, and you begin to bring that into the church, we have had our own issues here at Metropolitan.
Right.
You've had people that have had very strong feelings on the mask versus no mask, and they make their opinions known.
Right, vocally, absolutely.
Vocally and on social media. Masks are a good example. Vaccines are another good example. Do you get vaccinated? Are you against vaccines? I've had people that have requested for me to write, some sort
religious
of
exemption
for their work, and there are other things that people have brought into the church. The polarity when it comes to the political sphere, that you have Republicans and Democrats. It's like not just cats and dogs. I mean, like some of the issues that we've seen in the last year have been very, very polarizing. Definitely. So how do you live that out in the church?
Yes, I think that's so hard. And I think whenever we look at that, then inevitably as pastors, we kind of compare ourselves to how we're doing versus how other churches are doing, right?
Right.
And so we want to look at, well, how's this church doing? How's this church handling? How's this pastor handling it? This group of people handling it? And inevitably, pastors, I think, we kind of take that on. Right, and we start to say, well, why aren't we doing as well as some of these other groups? Why aren't we doing as well as this church? Why have we had more people leave than maybe the church down the road? And I think that's one of the unique struggles that maybe pastors face that is just different from everybody else, is the fact that we are comparing ourselves to how other churches are doing, and it's so deadly, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And pastors we tend to get together, at different conferences or things that we go to. And the inevitable question as a pastor, if you don't know that other person, is, hey, tell us about your church. What's your attendance patterns like? I don't know if anybody ever asked about budget, but it might be a metric that we use. And it's so easy, to compare, and it's so easy to kind of put yourself against another person, and especially in this world that we live in with social media, how easy it is to see, and the example that we heard recently at a conference was when you look at people's Easter services, and you go like, my friend's church was full, but my church, wasn't full, and that can be rather debilitating.
Absolutely. No, and that's absolutely true, because then, that's part of that conflict that is just kind of consistently there, right? That especially as pastors, you have internal conflict and you have that external conflict, especially when you look at social media, because again, social media is a platform to put your best foot forward.
Yep.
I have yet to see a post where somebody said, our church was half full on Easter, and we are praising God for that. Thank you, Lord, that half of our pews were filled. That's not what we do. And maybe we should. Maybe we should do that more.
Yeah.
Maybe we should be more vulnerable like that. But we don't normally see that. What you see is, our service was full. Thank God we had X amount of baptisms, and those are great. We need to celebrate those things. But if you're an outsider as a pastor looking in, and all you see are the good things, then that can be so deflating. It can be so, oh, what am I doing wrong? Why aren't we there? What do we need to do to get there? And most of the time you're trying to think, what do we need to do to survive? What do we need to do to make sure we can, pay our people and keep the lights on and do those things, which is a big financial stress from people having lost, congregants over here.
Yeah, the latest research with Varna that has done some of this research on pastors in particular And the question was rather direct and pointed. In the last year, talking to pastors, have you seriously considered leaving the ministry? And they've discovered, 38% of pastors have answered that in the affirmative. Yes, I have given serious consideration to not just going to a different church, but leaving ministry altogether. And so we're seeing how all these issues, as they circulate, we've been focusing so much on the doctrine of the church. Here's where we get very personal and vulnerable to say that this has been really, really difficult. There are financial stresses that you talked about. Loss of people, that's impacted everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the statistic was like 65%, or churches are 65% smaller on average than what they were pre-COVID, pre-pandemic.
Absolutely. And the fact that each of those people, like each of those numbers represent a person person that you're caring about, maybe a person who was criticizing. Maybe whenever those people leave, then their friends criticize. There's that constant criticism, and so we could name a million things, but really what we want to say is that we are hoping that churches around the United States, around the globe, really start to address mental health in real ways, in ways that are helpful, in ways where we say you can get professional help and that is good, in ways where we say it doesn't make you less of a Christian if you need medication for a season or for a lifetime. Like that those things are things that can be good graces of God in your life, and we want to open those up. And so maybe we just talk a little bit about just a couple of next steps that we want to talk through. And I think one of the things that we really want to say is just the fact that if you are struggling with mental health, we hope that you are in community.
Yes.
We hope that that is something that you are not struggling with in the dark, that you're not struggling with alone, but that you can get into a good, deep community of people who know you and who love you and can point you to Jesus Christ through that. We hope you know that there is professional help available, whether it's through a counselor or a therapist, whatever you need to do, that there's so many of those resources that are out there that you can do. And we just want to say that as a Christian, it does not make you less than if you seek professional help. Everybody deserves to have somebody who is professional be able to speak into their lives, right? That's why some people are like, I need a trainer at the gym. And we're not like, you can't do it by yourself. Oh, you're getting a personal trainer? No, sometimes you need professional help to reach your goals. And that's true for mental health as well.
And I want to say, too, there might be something to say to those that aren't struggling right now.
Yeah.
As we're surrounded by people in our churches that are struggling, one of the best things that you can do is to say, oh man, I'm with you, or you might say, me too. Not in a sense of let me trump your story,
right?
But when you validate somebody, if they're taking that risk of being transparent, you say, man, I just want you to know I love you. And I think so often in the church, we shy away from conversations like this because we're afraid, or maybe we've had experiences in the past where we have opened that door and there has been criticism on the backside.
Right.
Well, maybe you're not praying enough.
Right.
Maybe you're not reading your Bible
Don't have enough faith.
You don't have enough faith, right? And those can be so damaging, and that causes us to enclose, and so that just creates that circle and that problem.
Definitely.
Exacerbates.
And so if we can look at something, we all need to be a little bit more like our introduction to Job's friends, where they just came and sat with him.
Yeah.
Not when they start talking, because sometimes when we open our mouth, we mess stuff up. So maybe sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit with people in their grief, sit with people in their struggles, in their trauma, in their whatever situation they're walking through in life, that we can just sit with them and be there with them. As my wife likes to say, sometimes the most healing words you can hear are, here's your latte. Just doing some type of physical act of service. But whatever that is, we just want to say that we love you. We hope that we can be a resource to open up some of these conversations and reach out. And if you need to see that the sermon that Pastor John did, it's fantastic. We'll link that in the show notes as well. And we look forward to our next conversation here on the Knowing God podcast.
All right, God bless you.